Welcome, everybody. My name is Ann Dolan, and today we're talking about practical ideas for kids over the summer to keep them engaged in learning and not to lose too much information they've obtained during the school year. This is a Zoom session, so on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see a panel. This allows you to communicate with me by asking questions. So at any time you have a question, maybe it's a question about your child, but it can relate to everybody else. There is no question that somebody else isn't thinking. Please type it in and I'll answer it as we go. I'll also take a few minutes at the very end to answer additional questions that you have. I'd love for this to be interactive. So let's get started. You know, for the last 20 years, I've been working with students in a tutoring capacity. Prior to that, I was a teacher in Fairfax County Public Schools. And what I noticed is that some kids came back in the fall really ready to learn. And some kids, it was clear they hadn't done much all summer long. So we all don't want our kid to be that one. We want that child, our kids, to be prepared and ready to go once the school year rolls around. The question is, we still want to give them a break. So how do we find that perfect balance between keeping them engaged but not going overboard? That's what we're going to talk about today. So why is the summer learning so important after all? Well, a couple of things. First, studies show that kids score lower on the same tests in the fall than in the spring if they've done nothing all summer. They can lose 2.5 months of progress in both language arts and in math. So we certainly want to keep them engaged. Studies also show that when kids read at least 4 books over the summer, they completely negate the summer learning loss when it comes to language arts. And not only that, but they have better fall reading test scores, and most importantly to many of us, they have better first quarter grades. So first, let's think of summer work as assigned versus not assigned. Well, assigned is what the teacher might dole out to your child this time of year in June before the end of the year. Maybe your child gets a reading list. Maybe they're just suggested books they can read, or maybe they're required to read a book off the list. Sometimes teachers will give a math packet. And even though this math packet may not be required, it's an excellent way for your child to practice math skills over the summer. So even if your child says, I don't have to do it, make them do it. It's important to keep them engaged in math as well over the summer. So we think of work as school assigned and then parent assigned work. Parent assigned work might be your work that you want your child to do, perhaps because the teacher hasn't given anything to do over the summer, but you know you want to keep your child engaged. So first, let's talk about that assigned work. You know, I always think it's great at this time of the year or even at the very beginning of summer to sit down with our kids and talk to them about what's been assigned. What book do they have to read? Or can they choose a book? Do they have to also write an essay? Do they need to do a math packet? So sit down with your child and determine what has to be done and then when it's due. Usually it's due that first week of school. But then the question is to your child, not for you to decide, but to talk to your child about solutions for ways in which it can be broken down. Come August 1st, we get all kinds of calls from parents that say, oh my gosh, my child has to read a book. It's 300 pages and it's due in 2 weeks. I'm so mad at him. He hasn't done anything the whole summer. We don't want to be those parents that, trust our kids are going to do it over the summer and then we find out in early August or even mid-August that they haven't even opened the book. So we want to start in early summer by asking them, how might you break this down? And ask them when they might get started and how much they might do every day. So for example, you may come to an agreement with your child that they're going to read after dinner for 20 minutes. Or maybe they're just going to work on their math packet every Tuesday and Thursday morning. Anything like that is super helpful. Basically, you want a schedule. And you want to develop it into a routine. Not just that your child says, oh yeah, mom, I'm going to do this, I promise, but you want to help them to make sure they get into that routine of really following through. And that's why a written agreement or a simple checklist can help. So we'll talk about that in just a second. But a written agreement might be that Jimmy is going to work on math for 20 minutes every Tuesday and Thursday at some point. And maybe that written agreement goes on the refrigerator as a visual reminder of what they're going to do. A visual reminder is always better than a verbal reminder. A verbal reminder, Jimmy, did you do the math yet? Goes in one ear and out the other. And it also puts you in the place of homework police. And nobody wants to be homework police, especially over the summer. We want our kids to have accountability for what they're going to do. So that written agreement can help. I'm going to show you a simple checklist in just a minute, and this is really helpful for younger students. I love using Sundays during the school year and even in the summer to look ahead for the week. So this is a time, maybe 15 minutes after dinner, tie it to something you already do. Maybe you always have Sunday night dinners. And you sit down with your child and say, okay, let's look ahead to the week. What's coming up? Oh, this week you have volleyball camp. All right, we're going to leave at about 8:45. Make sure you're down here by 8:40. Starts at 9 o'clock. Whatever you want to do to go through the routine of when it starts, when it ends. And then talk about what are the days that you're going to work on your book or your math packet, for example. I like Sundays because it helps kids get off to the week in an organized fashion. They know what to expect. And when kids know what to expect, they're much more likely to follow through with you and not push back. Because if you say, hey, Jimmy, it's Thursday, you really need to do that math and do it now, it's not as effective as if the child already knows on Thursdays, I do this, and they know what to expect. They have that written agreement. Also consider that if your child is on medication for ADHD, for example, during the school year, and they're going to take a medication holiday over the summer, it's going to be harder for them to focus in on work. It's going to be harder for them because they don't have the medication to help them with focus, but also because there's a lot less structure in the summer. And that can make it difficult for kids if they don't always have that routine. So that's why some type of schedule works really well. So we want to consider if our child is medicated during the year but not in the summer, that these things are going to be inherently just a little bit more difficult for them. I really like this book called Organizational Training for Kids with Children with ADHD. It's a great book for parents too on how to develop organizational kits for their training for their kids. And it's something that you could take a look at over the summer if you want to put more of a routine in place in the school year. So here's a summer learning checklist, and I would do this for little kids, like elementary school kids. Clearly, you don't want to be doing a checklist like this with your 16-year-old because they're way too old. But I always find that if you're going to ask your child to do something difficult, like maybe a math worksheet or read a chapter, that it has to be coupled with something that they like to do. So maybe if they do a math worksheet, they can earn 30 minutes of screen time. Or they read for 15 minutes, they can earn 30 minutes of screen time. And if they show you what they've done, maybe they show you the math worksheet, so it's not just, yeah, I did that, Mom, but they actually show it to you, they get an additional 15 minutes of screen time. So a little simple learning checklist like this helps to give your child accountability. So something that they really, really want to do, like maybe they want video games or they want time on their iPad in elementary school, those things should be a reward, not just a given. Because if they get up in the morning and they don't really have any structure or schedule and they automatically get those things, it's very hard to pull them away and say, oh, honey, and now you have to read. That may not go so well. So those things are better left as rewards. Also, other things I've done with kids have not just been rewards like video game time, but hey, if you have these things done during the week, we'll go out to Target and you can pick out your favorite pack of baseball cards. I've also done with kids when they had to do read a book, for example, that they weren't super excited about. I've said, all right, let's take this Snickers bar and break it up into pieces and over the next 3 days. And if you get your reading done, let's say you have a Monday, Wednesday, Friday schedule. On Monday, you get a little piece of the Snickers bar Tuesday and Wednesday. And although it seems like bribing, it's really helping kids associate, if I get this hard thing done, I can reward myself, and this isn't so bad after all. Let's talk about reading. So what are some good books for kids? Well, at the elementary school level and even older kids, we always want to let them pick their books. And we don't want to just say, hey, I heard about this book on a webinar. This is what you're going to read this summer. We all know that interest is an incredibly good motivator for kids. So what often I'll encourage kids and parents to do is to go on Amazon and to type in, let's say you have a middle school daughter who loves horses and she's a reluctant reader. You can type in books about horses for middle school girls, reluctant reader, and you'll find a list of books that may be a match for your daughter. But here are some popular ones for kids of all ages. So in elementary school, Stick Dog, Here's Hank, and Mouse Scouts are popular books. And in middle school, Hook's Revention, Chasing Brooklyn, and Pop. And then for older kids, high school, there's a number of great books, Prompusol, Awkward, and Swagger. So how do you get kids to read in the first place? Well, for little kids, if they don't love reading and we say, now, Jimmy, I want you to go to your room and read that book, it may not go so well. I mean, I know when my kids were little, especially my youngest son, if I told him to go upstairs and read a book, I'd walk upstairs a half hour later and he would be playing with Legos. So I found that with him and the kids I've worked with over the years that I always had to lower my expectations. And if I got engaged with the kids, it made a big difference. So it could be that we read with our kids to get them started. And maybe we read a page, they read a page. Or for a really reluctant reader, you read 2 pages, your child reads 1 page. And as you go along, don't feel like you have to be the teacher. As you're reading with your child, you don't need to ask them a lot of reading comprehension questions. Sometimes kids get put off by that. And we think we're doing a good job kind of taking the role of the teacher. But in general, at the end of the chapter, you might ask questions like, what do you think was important about that chapter? Wait, why did that event relate to this event? Basically, you want to make sure that they're getting the gist of it. I also love the idea of family book clubs, and you can do that in any way. It could be that your family all reads the same book. Obviously, it's going to be on the level of probably the youngest child in your family. Or it could be that everybody is in on the act of reading a book over the summer, and you have something called Dear Time. Drop everything and read. And maybe this is 20 minutes after dinner each evening, or maybe 15 minutes on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and Sunday perhaps. That's a schedule. And everything is off, all electronics, the TV, phones, everything. And it's a time when everybody gets in on the act of reading, either reading together in the family book club or everybody just reading their own book. But kids are far more motivated if they don't have distractions. So this gives them uninterrupted time. A couple of other things that are interesting are that Kindles can be helpful to kids, Kindles or iPads, but they can also be distracting. Certainly, if you need to read a book, but you can also watch YouTube videos, chances are you're going to watch YouTube videos. But Kindle does have a product called the Paperwhite, and this is super helpful. Internet access is very limited, and basically, it's electronic books, and that's all it is. And it's so great because, with online books, kids can also increase the font or change how many words they see on the page. They can make the font smaller, bigger. They can do all kinds of things to the text. And that's really helpful because for some kids, when the text is larger, it's a very motivating factor, and they actually become more fluent if they can read fewer words on a page. So the Paperwhite could be an option. We also know that Audible books can be really helpful to kids. And Amazon has an app called Audible, which you've probably heard about. And research shows that when kids want to read a book just above their reading level, but it might be a little bit hard for them, if they listen to the book and they follow along while reading it, not just listening to it, but following it along, they can improve their comprehension and their fluency more than if they read the book independently. likely because it's just a little bit too hard for them. And when it's a little bit too hard, you don't read as fluently, which is basically as smoothly and with the same rate, and you don't understand as much. So Audible books are not cheating. Sometimes parents say, oh, I can't let them listen to a book and follow along. That's cheating. It's not really reading. It's perfectly fine. There are also some online reading programs for kids, and these would be for younger kids. So K5 learning is popular. Also Study Dog. I did this one with my kids when they were little, and I really like it. It's still around. But also Scholastic has a summer reading challenge, and they have it every summer where kids can log in and put in the books that they're reading and log in their minutes and win prizes. And that is motivating. So something like an online reading challenge is great, or even going to the local public library the old-fashioned way, like what we did when we were kids, picking out a great book there and signing up for their summer reading program. So these types of programs provide accountability. And to be honest, these types of programs with built-in accountability are better than us as parents saying, now, Susie, did you read today? Or why didn't you read today? But when they know that each week they're going to go to the library and check in, that's an awesome way of providing accountability that doesn't require you being the reading police. So Barnes & Noble, all the public library, all have these programs for kids. And they can also register for discussion groups, which I love. So these are usually books that the location chooses, and it's great for kids to be involved in getting the book read and then showing up for the discussion group. This type of skill is so important as kids get older. Now, for high school students, sometimes we think, well, it's kind of up to them to do what they want to do. But I like a program called Read Storied, which is really neat. It allows kids to read and to develop their vocabulary as they go. Now, when it comes to writing, there's lots of things we can do too. It's a little bit harder to get kids to write over the summer, but a dialogue journal is a great idea. I used to do this with my students when I was a teacher, and I did with my kids when they were younger. As a tutor, I always did this with my students, where I would get like a composition book, and each week I would pose a question to them. It might be, hey, you mentioned your soccer game and that you scored a goal. How did you get around that last defender? And you let them write you back. So as a parent, you can do this at night. Have a composition book, and each day write your child a question or tell them something great they did and ask them a question about it. They write back to you, and then you write back to them the next day. So when they go to their room that night to wind down, they have their page written. It's probably just a couple of lines that you write, and then they can write back to you. I love this as a keepsake at the end of the summer. The goal here is not to critique a child's spelling or even their grammar. In fact, you don't even want to find any mistakes. Otherwise, they won't be as engaged. Instead, you just want to get them to write. Even if they're drawing pictures half the time, that's okay. Just get them engaged. I also love the idea of a scrapbook. Scrapbooks are great for kids over the summer. Girls especially like these, where they can print out pictures of their trip and write captions underneath, or maybe they write a little journal entry. It's a super fun way to have a keepsake for the summer. And you can find more summer reading ideas on our website, ectutoring.com/summer-writing. Another idea is something called cardboard connections. And this is kind of old-fashioned, but I found that boys especially, even now, still love to do it. And it gives you the right-of-way addresses for sports figures, and kids can write into their favorite athletes asking for an autograph. Here are a few math resources that might also work for you. Summer is a great time not to really do the work that they've not experienced. So for example, if they've just started out division, it's not your job as a parent to teach them now long division. They probably just need to know the basics and to practice on the basics. So math facts, knowing those is really helpful. A couple of ideas are funbrain.com. These are online resources. I also like multiplication.com. These are fun video game-like ways to practice multiplication facts. And then Math Playground is great as well. For older students, Algebra to Go is actually a great workbook, and so is Power Up Your Math Skills. It's a series for older students, starting with the basics of pre-algebra and going higher than that. So if your child ended up struggling, say, for example, in pre-algebra, and you're worried about him going into algebra, it doesn't hurt to get them, don't get them an algebra book, get them the class that they just took, so that they're practicing the main concepts of those things over the summer. Also, a couple of other fun ideas to practice math. Certainly, having a good old-fashioned lemonade stand and counting the money. Counting the strikes, hits, walks at a local baseball game, or even cooking over the summer, measuring those ingredients helps them understand fractions at a conceptual level. I remember a parent said, "Oh, my child just doesn't get percents. It's driving me nuts. He should know this by now." And so she had him calculate tips for the entire summer every time they went out to eat, and he wasn't allowed to use a calculator. And it allowed him to think about, okay, 10%, that's easy, it's this. So 15% is this, and 20% is this. So that's a great skill you can have your kids work on over the summer. Sometimes parents will say, we're going to do a family game night over the summer, and there's one night a week, and say Friday night, that we're all going to play a game. A great website to look up games that might be fun for your family is educationallearninggames.com. So a lot of them that we think, might be old-fashioned are still amazing. Monopoly to teach money, Scrabble to teach vocabulary, and also just manipulation of sounds and letters and spelling. One that I use a lot with kids in practicing math skills and flexibility and multiplication, division, and subtraction is Challenge 24. It's one of my favorite card games for kids. So for younger kids, get the beginning level. And let kids pick the game that they want. So maybe you put a different child in charge of it every week. They get to pick the game, the dessert, the snack, whatever it is, the music in the background. And sometimes parents will say, I love these ideas, but if left to my own devices, I'm worried that I may not follow through, or I'm worried that my child will resist my overtures. If you're worried that your child doesn't have really the self-motivation to continue to work over the summer, a tutor can do wonders. So a tutor can work on all kinds of things. It's really common for parents to say, I want to work a little bit in reading, writing, and math. Basically, I don't want him to lose 2.5 months over the summer. I want to ensure that the tutor comes weekly, works with my child, and then gives practice assignments for him to do independently, and then checks them and gives some more the next time. That's a great way to help with accountability and practice, and the parent doesn't have to be in on the action and become that summer homework police. So, Michelle, let's start with questions. Anybody have a question that might help, or that you want to ask about the summer?
Great. Well, first off, I had a mom say that last summer her son just sat around all day and was on his phone and on social media, and he waited till the very last minute to read an assigned book. So this summer, she wants, any suggestions you may have to kind of keep him engaged.
Mm-hmm. Sure. That's such a common one. Sometimes parents have found that if they take more control over the devices, it ends up better. So it's easier to do in the school year. It's a little bit harder in the summer because, kids have a lot more free time. But what you could consider doing for this parent, Rochelle, is to say, all right, at night, all devices, iPad, laptop, phone, whatever it is, go on the family charging station. And this is basically a place where kids plug in all their electronics at night, because they really shouldn't have these things in their room. It might be different if we're talking about a 16 or a 17-year-old, but like a 10-year-old, they don't need to have these things in their room. So the night before, they put everything on the charging station. And maybe the charging station is in your kitchen, or it could be in your bedroom. And that way you know that everybody's stuff is there. And you say, all right, you can have your phone back in the morning once I see that this is done, or after I see that you've worked through this math worksheet or you've read this chapter in your book, and then yes, you can have your phone. So I might take control of the phone and use mornings to get things done and get kids going. And sometimes that helps. It's much harder to allow kids to have the device and then try to pull them away from it when they're just so engaged.
Great. Now, for those parents who, the kids don't have that much work to do over the summer and the parents want to assign work, how much work is enough?
It really honestly doesn't need to be that much. Even if they do 20 minutes a day, it's perfectly fine. It could be 15 minutes a day. It could be that they do a little bit of math a couple days a week and then do reading every night. But it doesn't have to be significant. It just has to be that they're maintaining their skills. So, I think a half hour a day is absolutely plenty, and it can be less than that too. The key is, the brain works by repetition and by learning something and sleeping on it. So, whenever we learn a little bit over a longer period of time, and like say we learn something Monday, we sleep on it that night, we learn something Tuesday, we sleep on it that night. When we go through that routine, we're storing what we've learned into long-term memory. But when we cram for a test, for example, or at the end of the summer, we hurry up and do that math packet that was assigned in June, we're really not aiding our long-term memory. So although kids may go back to school with the math packet done, have they really learned it? Probably not. It's probably just in their short-term memory, so it may not be that helpful after all. So I would say just do a little bit over the day. It doesn't have to be a lot, but what you don't want to do is wait till the last few weeks of the summer to do something.
Great. And last question for you, Anne, is what out and about things can kids do over the summer to keep, their learning?
Mm-hmm. We're so lucky to live in the Washington, D.C. area, and the Smithsonian's have a lot of cool programs for kids. They have sleepovers at the Smithsonian's. They have lots of opportunities for kids to go during the day. They have camps. So, as much as we can take them to local museums or, any learning event, wherever it might be, but the key isn't just to go and come back. The key is, okay, today we're going to go to the Air and Space Museum, the Dulles Air and Space Museum. Before we go, let's read up on it. Hey, let's look at the map of the building to see where we want to go first, and then second, where will we have lunch? And just allowing your child to read through the options and kind of plan the day is actually a lot better than just going and not really talking about it and coming back. That way you can say, oh, what was your favorite part? Was it what you expected? If you ran that museum, would you change anything? So talking to kids before the event and then after the event is super powerful.
Great. Well, those are all the questions.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Rochelle. And thank you so much, everybody, for joining me today. I hope this was helpful. If I can be of service in the future, just send me an email at any time. My email is Ann, A-N-N, @ectutoring.com. Have a great day.